in talking about this, you were talking about different ways that, the people on the left have, made sense of what happened or tried to, to analyze what happened. Certainly, whatever you make of it, a very shocking event. And you referred to an article that Danny and I had written for Jacobin, which came out on January 15th, called Trump is a Threat to Democracy, but that doesn't mean he's winning, which was an attempt to intervene in two related debates that one of which had been going on for years, but with increasing intensity, which was the debate about fascism analogies for Trumpism, for MAGA, and the other one, which was related certainly in many people's usage of it, was the coup debate about January 6th, which certainly many people on the left, anecdotally at least, would combine those and say what happened on January 6th was defeated, but it was a fascist coup. That's how they would define it. And Danny and I were pushing back against that, both on the merits and then also trying to explore why it matters, right? Like, because I could see somebody reading the whole thing otherwise and thinking, okay, I mean, I don't know, maybe you're right, but like, who cares? It's like I remember Amber Frost on Chapo having a joke once right after Trump was elected, where she's making fun of people, saying it's like, oh no, technically, it's only fascism if it comes from the Vichy region of France, as otherwise it's just a sparkling, whatever. So we didn't want to fall into that, right? We wanted to say, no, we don't think it's right, and also here's why it matters. So I've been talking for a while. Who wants to pick it up from here?
Well, I have one quick comment, which is to say that we mentioned you in the episode we did on the aftermath of 1/6, which we did. It's not quite our most recent episode. We just a few days, maybe a week ago, published one with Sam Goldman on his new book on nationalism, but it was a pretty recent episode. So it was a few months after the fact. So we call it the aftermath of January 6th, kind of like how it's lived on in the public imagination, how it's fit into the discourse, how different factions have talked about it in the weeks and months since. But we also, I think, I can't remember if we mentioned a specific article from the two of you, or if we just kind of referenced both of you in the context also of our fascism debate episode, which came out, I think, in January of this year. So when I said we were picking on you, it was in the plural. So once.
I guess to be clear, you picked on Danny twice, but on me just the once, and in that context, you were talking very specifically about the article that Danny and I wrote for Jacobin. There were some quotes from it. There were specific references. So maybe the most useful way to structure this would be we could start with Danny talking a little bit about what the point of that article was, and then we could get into the critique.
I just want to make one intervention, which is to say, you might say we're picking on you, but actually the fact that we've mentioned Danny twice in these contexts is a kind of nod of admiration or something, because in these kind of ideal types we sketch out on some of these episodes, you're representative of a smart leftist who we think doesn't quite agree with us, and so the fact that we've referenced you twice, it's actually an homage, not a series of bullying podcasts.
That's why I didn't feel bullied. I don't think it's possible for me to feel bullied, but thank you. I do appreciate it. I understood it.
We picked the strongest arguments. It's like, instead of we steel man. So if we were to, we could pick on all kinds of other dumb leftists, but we choose a scarily smart one instead. So
well, thank you. So maybe I could just state my position, and then we can go from there.
Sure.
So on the fascism question, which has gotten a lot of play, so I'll be brief. On one hand, I don't think it resembles what most Americans think about or are referencing when they say fascism, which is generally, I would say 95% of instances Nazism, and maybe in 4.5% of instances Italian fascism, and then in 0.5 of instances Argentina or something like that. And for the ones that I know best, I'm a European intellectual historian, at least partially by training. It doesn't really resemble fascism of the classical European variety. So empirically, I would say that's incorrect. Then my critique is that also historically, when one is looking at the actual formation of the American national security state, generally in reference to foreign policy, but also in reference to domestic carceral logics, domestic security logics. And when you look at the formation of these state forms, during and after World War II, one of the most powerful arguments in favor of them was that in order to defend against fascism, you needed to build such a state form. You needed to actually embrace some fascistic, or what they would usually term at the time, totalitarian features in order to defend against fascism. So throughout, and this is an argument that's repeated in 1968. This is an argument that's repeated throughout the second half of the 20th century. It's an argument that becomes powerful after 9/11. And so the argument for fascism, the diagnosis of fascism, has been used historically over and over again by the power elite that I would argue has the most power in our society to justify what I would say are anti-democratic and anti-leftist measures. Now, one could point to other traditions of the diagnosis of fascism, particularly the Black radical tradition, and I understand and respect that not everything needs to be what I focus on, but I would argue that empirically, and given the current power constellation of the United States, the liberal diagnosis of fascism is what we on the left have to primarily worry about. When someone like David Brooks is identifying fascism, he's not doing so in the Black radical tradition. Then I would argue that today, since 9/11 in particular, there's been a gross inflation of both foreign and domestic security threats. And that this inflation of threats, which is basically, it's like water. It's the air we all breathe. It's like water if you're a fish. It's the air we all breathe. This is just what we do in this country, particularly in the last 20 years, and our basically lifetimes as adults, is we inflate threats. And I think, and again, empirically, if one is to diagnose Trump as a fascist, then one has to diagnose Obama, Bush, Clinton, many other American presidents as a fascist. And one might very well do that. But again, that was not the tenor of what people who actually hold power in this country were doing when they diagnosed Trump as fascist. And then, so that's my criticism of the fascism debate. And as you guys noted on your podcast, this bleeds into the debate about insurrections. And I would argue that calling what happened on January 6th an insurrection is incorrect again, empirically, and is foolish politically. There have been insurrections in this country, obviously, most famously, the Civil War. But even, if you look at the Reconstruction era, I posted about this on Twitter, like genuine insurrections where armed mobs forced governors out of office and had to be put down by the military. And I don't think what happened on January 6th even approaches that. And again, politically, given the power constellation of the United States, I think diagnosing it, overinflating what happened on January 6th, does nothing but play into the hands of the security state, which has only grown more and more powerful over the last 75 years, really over the last 20 as well, and has already made noises about DVEs, domestic violent extremists, that have a lot to do with that will undoubtedly not redound to the left's benefit. So I think it's also foolish politically to do that. And before I'm seeing some chats, like some definitions of fascism. Like I just want to say, like, I know all that stuff. I'm trained in this stuff. There are many disagreements about what does and doesn't constitute fascism. Different people say different things at different times. I'm not particularly interested in the sort of checklist diagnosis of fascism. I don't think that's a particularly useful way to use analogies. And I'll end it there.
Yeah, so I am trying to be conscious, and we'll try to be conscious as we go forward, of my awkward dual role as as the person managing the conversation and as the co-author of the article. So I obviously have views on this, but I did just to slip into the second one a little bit. I mean, I think one way to maybe sharpen one of Danny's points and to relate it to Matt and Sam's interests is that it also seems to me that and one of the points you made on the podcast, which is totally right, is if something's true, it shouldn't matter what the political valence is. You should just say the true thing, and then and then figure out the politics from there. I'm on board with that, and Danny's I think is on board with that. I think that our purpose was to say this is what we think is true, and here's why we think it matters. But just to dwell for a second on the here's why we think it matters. I think that a big part of the political upshot, very frequently, of fascism comparisons for Trumpism, and is to like highlight or claim this big discontinuity, between Trumpism and previous forms of conservatism and in particular often Bushism, because some of the people who were pushing this analogy were like literally former Bush administration officials like David Frum. And that's one of the reasons it interests me that you guys have the position that you do, because like I don't remember which of you tweeted this. I think maybe Matt, but it could have been Sam, which is a tweet that I completely agree with. You said what Trump was just the progression that Lee Atwater was describing, run in reverse, right? So like there's this famous quote from Lee Atwater where he's saying you start out saying the N-word a lot, and then as sensibilities change, you have to start talking about forced busing, and then eventually it's like welfare and taxes, and it becomes super abstract. And you're saying, well, this is basically like what American conservatism is, just being less disguised, which strikes me as a point that's pulling in the opposite direction from where people are at least very often going when they make the fascism analogies.
Well, Matt, do you want to respond first, or that sounds like a Matt tweet to me?
Yeah, no, I did tweet that. The Lee Atwater was my tweet, which I think I tweeted that in the context of JD Vance's ongoing kind of pathetic attempt to be like the Trumpist candidate in the Ohio Senate race, when Josh Mandel's out there just like, giving people the real shit.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben, I think you replied to my tweet about this. You're not going to want empty filler after you've had the good stuff. Yeah. And Trump gave him the good stuff, which is to say, I mean, it's kind of one of the cliches of the Trump era, saying the quiet part out loud, which I hate that line, but there is some truth to it in that, Trump just said Mexicans are rapists.
Right.
He didn't feel the need to like make some other argument about wages for native-born workers and that kind of thing.
You just really classed up what my actual response was, which was that after people have been snorting the pure uncut Trump for 4 years, they're not going to want the stuff that's been stepped on 3 times and mixed with baby laxatives. Which I lived in Miami for 6.5 years. These are the analogies that come naturally to me. But Matt, please.
Yeah. And I'm just going to keep this quick because I want Sam to hop in. But I do think you've identified something interesting, which is that we probably have a more dire interpretation of 1/6 in some ways than you and Danny. I don't know what the right word is. Dire is what I use, but fill in, with what you want.
Sure, seems good.
On our fascism episode, I actually kind of landed with Robert Paxton. 1/6 kind of put me over the edge to call Trump or Trumpism something like fascism. There's all kinds of qualifications I would make to that, but nonetheless, as you're indicating, we kind of hold that position as we differ with you in other ways.
On our fascism episode, I came down on the other side. I said it wasn't fascism.
So Sam and I kind of disagreed with
but I mean, it might not be obvious to your audience because it's sort of the way this is being set up. It sounds like we're on the side of it's definitely fascism and 1/6 was definitely a coup, which has not been what we've said on the podcast or on either of those episodes. Really, the fascism debate episode which I think is a really good one worth listening to, even though we were picking on Danny. We tried to like show the whole contours of the debate, try to show like what all the positions are and really do and talk about the stakes, like sort of what's the submerged debate that's going on what do we talk about when we talk about fascism, kind of, or Trump? What do we talk about when we talk about Trumpist fascism? And I think with the 1/6 thing, we kind of did the same thing. We were arguing for a slightly different interpretation of the event and putting it in a slightly different context than we'd seen it been put in, which is sort of the trajectory of like militia and far right extremist mobilization over the course of the year, but overall we were trying to do a similar thing, which is like how are different factions, mostly of the right, but a little bit on the left, like metabolizing this event. How is it informing the way that they're talking about politics now, and how has their story changed? Because the right story has changed a lot. Something I noted that was interesting in your rereading your piece from January, I noticed the line where you referenced how Sam Moyn identified this moment where it seemed like maybe the right was going to use 1/6 to sort of Trump wash themselves, and by vociferously declaiming that event, seek some kind of absolution for themselves for having participated actively in Trumpism for the whole time he was a president. Of course, that hasn't happened at all, right? That's one of the only things really in your piece that I thought like, well, they just really didn't know that wasn't going to happen. Most of the pieces, you couldn't have known.
I'd actually forgotten that we said that. I had my line, what it says in the description for this on YouTube even is that I think, which I do think overall, that the analysis of that's made in the piece has actually been strongly confirmed by revelation since then, but and made stronger. But that is an exception. I will certainly give you that. That is not been that they've gone.
TBD. It depends what happens in the midterms.
Yeah, sure.
Then the political valence, I think, of Trumpism is very much remains an open question.
Yeah,
I don't think that's been solved by any stretch of the imagination at this moment.
Yeah,
it'll be
certainly the last 6 months. Very few Republicans have done that. That's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think TBD.
Yeah. But anyway, so my overall point was just like, unfortunately for your audience, they're not going to get like the showdown between the it's fascism, it was a coup argument and your guys' very compelling and nuanced argument.